Hello, this is Helen Motti, and I want to welcome you to For Eternity.
I put my heart in your hands and you taught me to fly.
Hebrews 13, verses 1 to 3 exhorts us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. I would like to begin this episode by playing a report featured on Channel 4 News, published February 23, 2012. Somali reporter Jamal Osman met with Islamists of Al-Shabaab, the largest among several armed Somali clans whose goal is to bring down Somalia's Transitional Federal Government, or TFG, and establish Sharia law.
Over the last 20 years, Somalia has built a sorry reputation as the world's most failed state, a base for pirates and radical Islamists now allied with Al-Qaeda. It is one of the key security nightmares for the world. That's why today Britain hosted a major international conference on the country's future, with almost all of Somalia's various leaders here in London. Almost, but not all. The Islamists of Al-Shabaab control most of the country, but they are not part of these talks. For tonight's special report, Somali reporter Jamal Osman has been into the region for an exclusive meeting with the Islamists of Al-Shabaab. Watch.
Even though the Islamist Al-Shabaab control most of Somalia, it was always going to be hard for the West to accept them as part of the country's future. Now it seems impossible. This crowd is celebrating Al-Shabaab's new alliance with Al-Qaeda.
We welcome the pledge between our Mujahideen and the international Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda.
I am here to talk to Al-Shabaab to find out what they think about the British government's big Somalia conference. And as this merger with Al-Qaeda means Somalia is now the main threat to the West, one with strong links to Britain. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Mumin was based in the UK until recently and was accused of recruiting British youths for Al-Shabaab.
Our unity means we can fight our enemies, the infidels, wherever they are.
William Hague and David Cameron have made Somalia one of their top priorities. Today's conference is to discuss Somalia's future. To Al-Shabaab, this is deeply offensive.
We would never participate in this conference. However, I would like to tell Europe and America that your peace depends on us being left alone. If you do not let us live in peace, you will not enjoy peace either.
Al-Shabaab are under attack from all sides, from Kenyan, Ethiopian and African Union troops. And drone and missile attacks by the West are killing Islamist leaders. I asked him if the West was right to be afraid that Al-Qaeda will now use Somalia as a base.
Those who commit injustice have a lot to be afraid of. The non-Muslim West has done many injustices to the Muslim people. Their worries and concerns reflect the guilt of their actions. All that we are asking is peace and security within our countries.
I went to town to see what Somalis thought about their new friends, the international terror group Al-Qaeda.
It's good, very good. The infidels unite against us, so the Muslims should unite. I support it.
We are very happy. We welcome it 100% as Muslims.
It's a huge victory for Muslims and a huge victory for Somalis. If Somalis don't support it, they'll regret it.
Al-Shabaab is seen in the West as a violent, fanatical regime. They impose strict Sharia law with punishments and executions. But for most people here, they are respected for bringing security after 20 years of civil war and for resisting the corruption that is common in Somalia. They get their message out with daily lectures like this. A sophisticated internet operation. And Twitter feed with more than 10,000 followers. To get their message across, they use the latest technology, but also the Somali traditional method. Somalia is known as the land of poets. Rise up, he says. The infidels have united. Somalia is a clan-based society. The real power lies with clan elders like Nur Haji. Al-Shabaab work hard to keep them on side. Britain and the West would have to work even harder to change their minds.
The British colonised us in the late 19th century, and now they want to establish a new form of colonisation. We have been fighting each other for the last 20 years, and they have done nothing to help us. And now when we succeeded in implementing Sharia law into our country, they want to recolonise us.
The British leaders say they wanted to help Somalis, but do Somalis even know who they are? I have got photos of David Cameron and William Hague, and I wanted to see how many people recognize them.
I don't know. Is it Tony Blair?
Turkish Prime Minister?
George Bush?
Mullah Omar, the Taliban leader.
Arafat. Yasser Arafat.
In fact, no one I met knew who they were. This is a sign of just how far apart these worlds are. And it's hard to see how they will come closer together if they won't even talk to each other.
More than 2 years on from this report, what is the present political, economic and religious climate in Somalia? And especially, what are our Christian brothers and sisters facing daily in this strife-torn African country? Here is a summary from the 2014 Open Doors webpage. Somalia has moved from the number 5 position on last year's World Watch list to number 2 this year. The main type of Christianity in Somalia is Christian converts from a Muslim background, referred to as Muslim background believers, or MBBs, with a very tiny population of expatriate aid workers. The position of Christians in Somalia has deteriorated, and Somalia is included in the category extreme persecution. In Somalia, the main persecution engine relates to Islamic extremism, and to a lesser extent, tribal antagonism and organised corruption. However, an Open Doors researcher reports that in the case of Somalia, the line between Islamic extremism and organised corruption is not easy to draw. Somalia is a Muslim-majority country. Islamic religious leaders and government officials publicly maintain, uphold and reinforce that there is no room for Christians. Within this context, the militant Islamic terrorist group of Al-Shabaab uses its presence in various parts of the country to radicalise communities at the expense of Christianity in general, and individual MBBs within their midst in particular. In all spheres of life, there is a strong drive to purge Christianity from Somalia. In addition, as a reflection of this anti-Christian sentiment, most Western NGOs have pulled out because of their supposed affiliation with Christianity. In a country where processes of Islamic extremism, tribal antagonism and organised corruption shape its persecution dynamics, it remains to be seen how the Somalian Church will develop in the future. Number 2 on the World Watch list. North Korea is number 1, and we have already examined what it is to be a Christian believer in that country. Before we go on, let's take a closer look at Al-Shabaab and gain an overview of the recent history of Somalia. I'll read from Al Jazeera's webpage. Al-Shabaab, meaning the youth in Arabic, are the largest group among several armed Somali groups and clans that aim to topple Somalia's transitional federal government and impose Islamic law. The group was formerly the military wing of the deposed Islamic Court Union, or the ICU, which controlled much of central and southern Somalia in late 2006. Al-Shabaab's fighters were eventually forced out of Somalia by Ethiopian troops in support of the largely powerless UN-backed interim government. The group refused to engage in the peace process that brought elements of the ICU into the government in 2009. While Sharif Ahmed, a former leader of the ICU, was sworn in as president of Somalia's transitional government, Al-Shabaab accused him of betraying the country and vowed to topple its new government. Since Ahmed's government took power, Al-Shabaab has been waging a brutal war against Somali state forces, killing and injuring scores of civilians in the process. Al-Shabaab first emerged as a counterforce to criminal gangs operating in Mogadishu, Somalia's capital. Adan Hashi Farah, also known as Iro, was appointed the first leader of the group by former ICU leader Hassan Dahir. It is believed that Iro and his fellow Al-Shabaab patrons were trained in Afghanistan and modelled Al-Shabaab after the Taliban, which ruled Kabul until 2001. Following Iro's death in a 2008 US missile strike, Sheikh Muqta Rabal, also known as Abu Mansur, took control of Al-Shabaab. He was later succeeded by Mokhtar Ali Zubair, or Godan. Today, Al-Shabaab is led by Ibrahim Haji Jamami, and otherwise known as Ibrahim al-Afghani. Al-Shabaab, which is believed to have links to Al-Qaeda, is regarded by the US and many other governments as a terrorist organisation. The FBI has expressed concern that the group may be expanding its reach and actively recruiting Western nationals to fight in Somalia. Ahmed has confirmed such reports, repeatedly speaking of an influx of foreign fighters fueling Al-Shabaab's war on Somalia's government. While it is not clear how Al-Shabaab funds its activities, Eritrea and some Arab nations have been accused of providing the organisation with financial and logistical support. More recently, Al-Shabaab has been accused of kidnapping Western tourists along the Somali-Kenyan border and holding them ransom. Marie de Dieu, a 66-year-old French woman who was suffering from cancer and heart disease, died while in the custody of her assailants in October 2011. Al-Shabaab has denied carrying out any of the abductions. So reports Al Jazeera. Now, from the CNN library titled Somalia Fast Facts, dated March the 3rd, 2014, we read, "Here's a look at what you need to know about Somalia, an impoverished, war-torn Eastern African country that borders the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean, Ethiopia, and Kenya. It has an area of 637,657 square kilometres, slightly smaller than Texas, a population of just over 10 million. The capital is Mogadishu. Ethnic groups consist of Somali, 85%, Bantu and other non-Somali, 15%, including around 30,000 Arabs. The religion is Sunni Muslim, and interestingly enough, unemployment is non-applicable. Non-applicable. Is that because Somalia has a 100% employment rate? I don't think so. Reading on from the CNN library, here are some excerpts from a Somalia timeline, which will give us a good overview of not only the history of this tragic place, but also key factors that have determined why Somalia is in the state it is today. The timeline is a little lengthy, but I feel it is necessary in order for us to glean what Somali people have lived through for the past over 50 years, and so better understand what Christian believers endure today, in the country ranked number 2 on the Open Doors World Watch List. Perhaps you'd like to get a cup of tea. July 1st, 1960. The new country of Somalia is formed through the union of newly independent territories, British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland. 1969, Mohammed Siad Barre leads a bloodless coup and becomes dictator. 1977 to 1978, Somalia invades the Ogaden region of Ethiopia. Ethiopia rebels and weakens Somalia's forces. The two countries have fought on and off since 1960. 1988, Somalia and Ethiopia sign a peace treaty. January 1991, President Barre is forced into exile after the United Somali Congress, USC, overthrows his military regime in Mogadishu. December 1992, faction leader Ali Mahdi Mohammed and warlord General Mohammed Farah Aidid sign a ceasefire brokered by US envoy Robert Oakley. December 1992, Operation Restore Hope is launched by UN coalition forces and led by the United States in an attempt to restore enough order to ensure food distribution to the Somali people. June 5, 1993, General Aidid's forces attack and kill 24 UN troops from Pakistan. September 25, 1993, an American Black Hawk UH-60 helicopter is shot down over Mogadishu and 3 soldiers on board are killed. October 3rd to the 4th, 1993, the Battle of Mogadishu. 2 Black Hawk UH-60 helicopters are shot down during a raid on Aidid's high-level staff at Mogadishu's Olympic Hotel. 18 American soldiers are killed and more than 70 are wounded. Pilot Michael Durant is captured. Hundreds of Somalis are also killed. Just as an aside, I am not a movie watcher, but I do recall that a fairly well-known movie has been made about that event. July 20th, 2011, the United Nations declares a famine in the southern Somalia regions of Bakul and Lower Shabelle. July 22nd, 2011, terrorist group Al-Shabaab reverses an earlier pledge to allow aid agencies to provide food in famine-stricken areas of southern Somalia. September 5th, 2011, the UN's Food Security and Nutrition Analysis Unit releases a report saying a total of 4 million people in Somalia need humanitarian aid and 750,000 people are in danger of imminent starvation. September 16, 2011, the UN Interagency Group for Child Mortality Estimation announces that Somalia has the highest mortality rate for children under 5 in the world. October 4, 2011, more than 70 people are killed and 150 injured when a truck filled with explosives drives into a government complex in Mogadishu. Most of the victims are students and their parents who are registering for a Turkish education program. Al-Shabaab claims responsibility. January 17, 2013. For the first time in more than 2 decades, the United States grants official recognition to the Somali government. May 2, 2013. A report jointly commissioned by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the US aid-funded Famine Early Warning Systems Network shows that 258,000 Somalis died in the famine between October 2010 and April 2012. Half of the famine victims were children younger than 5. And June 19, 2013. An attack on the UN headquarters in Mogadishu leaves at least 14 people dead and 15 others wounded. Al-Shabaab claims responsibility for the attack again. So this is Somalia, and this has only been a very brief overview of the tragic history of this country. War, hijackings, political coups, terrorist bombings, kidnapping, famine, the world's highest mortality rate for children under 5, and called by many the most dangerous place on the planet. Here's a gospel song from Kenya, which shares a 400-mile border with Somalia to the south, called Bwana Yesu. Bwana is the Swahili word for Lord or Sir. Another passionate praise song from a continent where tragedy and injustice have for so long reigned. And yet the believers can sing, and with a zeal and conviction we seem to struggle to muster up here in Australia, Jesus is Lord. And they believe it. Before we move on to examine the extreme hardships and persecution endured by Christians in Somalia, I would like to read to you excerpts from a National Geographic report which was written during the Nairobi Westgate Mall terrorist attack, to give us another insight into the operations of Al-Shabaab, who do not restrict their activities within the borders of Somalia alone. Michael Lockerson writes on September 23, 2013. As the terrorist siege of the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya dragged into its fourth day, the attackers and security forces still appeared to be battling each other, despite claims by the Kenyan government via Twitter that the mall had been secured. At least 62 civilians had been confirmed killed and more than 175 injured, according to government figures. The Somali militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attacks via Twitter and said it was retribution for recent Kenyan military actions against the group in Somalia. Kenya is no stranger to terrorist violence. Groups linked to Al-Shabaab have carried out many attacks in Kenya and elsewhere in East Africa over the past decade. Kenya is living with the fallout every day of what is happening in Somalia, said Christian Lepret, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science and Economies at the Royal Military College of Canada. Somalia, one of the poorest and most conflict-riven countries in the world, is often cited as an example of what political scientists refer to as a failed state. After the fall of longtime dictator Mohammad Siad Barre's administration in January 1991, the country's national government collapsed and rival warlords and factions battled for supremacy. Al-Shabaab, a radical offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union, the preeminent Islamist faction in the country during the early part of last decade, established itself in the mid-2000s and eventually became allied with Al-Qaeda. Spurred by the 2006 Ethiopian incursion into Somalia to dislodge the Islamic Courts Union from the capital Mogadishu, Al-Shabaab rapidly gained support and expanded into new territory, wresting control over most of the southern part of the country. But like the Islamic Courts Union, Al-Shabaab is a loose confederation of Islamist warlords and not a highly centralised organisation. Altogether, it has approximately 5,000 dedicated fighters, as estimated by the United Nations Monitoring Group on Somalia and Eritrea. Kenya shares a 400-mile border with Somalia and has had to endure an overflow of refugees during the past 2 decades. Recognising a need to restore some stability to its neighbour, the Kenyan government hosted the internationally recognised Somali Transitional Federal Government, as well as European training facilities for Somali soldiers. After Ethiopia withdrew from Somalia in 2009, an African Union peacekeeping force stayed behind. This force, led by Ugandan troops, managed to provide some cover for the transitional federal government to operate, but had to cede most of the south of the country to Al-Shabaab. In retaliation for the African Union establishing a mission within Somalia, Al-Shabaab in 2010 staged a series of attacks in Kampala, Uganda, killing 74 people. Then, in mid-2012, Kenyan forces, nominally under the auspices of the African Union, began an offensive against Al-Shabaab in the south of Somalia. The Kenyans restored the rule of the recognised government in several areas, including the important port town of Kismayo, Al-Shabaab's primary economic centre and political stronghold. Shabaab anger over its loss of territory and economic resources likely spurred the Westgate Mall attack. Let me read that again. Shabaab anger over its loss of territory and economic resources likely spurred the Westgate Mall attack. To continue, similar to what they did in Uganda, Al-Shabaab wanted Kenyan civilians to pay a price in order to drive up the cost of keeping troops inside of Somalia, said David Gudinstein-Ross, a senior fellow of the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. And while the Westgate Mall siege was by far the most complex and ambitious terror attack Al-Shabaab has staged within Kenya, more than 24 smaller-scale grenade and small arms attacks linked to Al-Shabaab have taken place there over the past 2 years. Kenya's deadliest terror attack, however, was the August 7, 1998 bombing of the American Embassy in Nairobi. Carried out by an Al-Qaeda cell, the coordinated attack against the American embassies in Kenya and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, killed a total of 234 people, 223 in Nairobi alone. Prior to the Kenyan intervention in Somalia, and with the exception of the 1998 embassy bombing, most high-level terror attacks within Kenya targeted Israelis or Israeli interests. In 1980, Arab terrorists bombed the Norfolk Hotel, killing 20 and injuring 80, in retaliation for Kenya allowing Israeli forces to refuel in the country during the 1976 hostage rescue at Entebbe Airport in Uganda. On November 28, 2002, Islamist radicals with ties to Somalia and Al-Qaeda bombed the Israeli-owned Paradise Hotel in Mombasa, Kenya, killing 13 and injuring 80. At the same time, terrorists fired 2 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles at a Boeing 757 airliner in Kenya owned by Israel-based Arkia Airlines. The missiles failed to hit the plane, which continued on its flight to Israel. So, we see that groups such as Al-Shabaab do not simply threaten those who are seen to be opposing them, More tragically, they do not confine their terrorist activities to military targets. Ordinary civilians and foreign nationals, not only in Somalia, but in Uganda and Kenya, have paid the price demanded by Islamic extremism with their lives.
African sun poured down like rain upon my skin. The door to change kicked open and I stumbled in. Traded in the freeway and the smell of the salt sea air. Learned to walk the red dust road over there, over there. And they told me this is Africa. They told me this is Africa. And they said that this is how it's done. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind the pointed gun. African song flowed down in a river of hope and tears, and the children smiled at me, sheltered by their years. And the people wrote their dreams in shades of black and white. No veiling war was made to fall across the line between day and night. And they told me this is Africa. They told me this is Africa. And they said that this is how it's done. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun. African journey brought me half a universe away as I stepped into the night in Bombay. 1,000 fingers clutched my hands and begged to walk with me. Someone threw some pennies down and said, hey, just let it be. And they told me this is India. They told me this is India. And they said that this is how it's done. With limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind the pointed gun. African sun came down, bled its colors across the sky. I looked out on the red dust road and said goodbye. Then the silence that held me was broken like a toy as the city fell in flames and the gun reached for the boy. And they told me this is Bosnia. They told me this is Bosnia. And they said that this is how it's done. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun. Told me this is Africa. They told me this is Africa. And they said that this is how it's done. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun. And they told me this is Africa. They told me this is Africa. And they said that this is how it's done. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun. Limousines and beggars, cries of peace behind a pointed gun.
So, as we have asked in previous episodes of For Eternity, what is it like to be a Christian in Somalia today, at this moment? Let's listen to a report from The Overcomers by Voice of the Martyrs.
The body of a 23-year-old Somali convert from Islam to Christianity, Momin Abdul Karim Youssef, was discovered in Mogadishu's Yakshid district. Members of the Al-Shabaab, an Islamic militant group, apprehended Youssef and searched his home for Christian material after a 15-year-old Muslim boy accused Youssef of trying to convert him to Christianity. In an attempt to extract evidence against him and gain information about other Somali Christians, the militants knocked out all of Youssef's front teeth and broke several of his fingers. They then shot him twice in the head and discarded his body on an empty residential street. Now, since it's unknown whether Youssef disclosed any information during the torture, the underground Christians who knew him have relocated for their safety.
To learn more about the persecuted church around the world and to receive the Voice of the Martyrs free monthly newsletter, please visit our website at persecution.net.
And following on, here are some excerpts from the 700 Club feature on Christian persecution in Somalia, reported by Gary Lane in April 2012.
Somalia's Islamist terror group Al-Shabaab recently joined with Al-Qaeda. It now wants Sharia law and to rid the Muslim country of all Christians. Specific targets are Christian converts from Islam. This Al-Shabaab video swept the internet in September 2008. It shows the brutal beheading of 25-year-old aid worker Mansour Mohammed. He converted to Christianity in 2005. 1 year ago, this Muslim convert to Christianity was awakened in his home by Al-Shabaab soldiers. We agreed to protect his identity and give him a different name, Abdi.
They ransacked my house, searched my bag, and found several pages from a Bible. They had crosses on them.
Abdi was taken away, imprisoned, and tortured.
Tell me what they then did to you and what they said to you.
I was blindfolded, and they put me in a dark, underground cell. They beat me up with a wooden baton. They wanted to know where I got the Bible pages, and if I knew of any others like me. When they finally took the blindfold off, I noticed 3 dead bodies in the room. They placed them there just to frighten me.
His torturers said they were going to kill him. But late one night, Abdi and 2 cellmates made a daring escape.
The guards thought they had locked our cell door, but it wasn't locked. We opened it, ran to the wall, and started climbing. The guards opened fire on us. Bullets killed one of my cellmates, but the other prisoner and I jumped over the wall.
Reunited with his family, Abdi is now living in a safe place. He says he still suffers physical pain from the torture he endured. Spiritually, he feels closer to God.
I was happy to go through all this because now I'm stronger spiritually. People prayed for me to escape. Their prayers are what saved my life.
Somali Christian leaders estimate less than 200 Christians exist in this country of 10 million. Secret believers like this woman, she wants us to call her Fozia, often suffer punishment and humiliation for refusing to conform to Islamic law. Fozia says as a Christian she could not bring herself to abide by Al-Shabaab's requirement that women wear a burqa. While Fozia dressed modestly, she did not want her face fully covered. Al-Shabaab Sharia police, similar to these on patrol in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, noticed Fozia walking in public without a burqa.
They said the clothing I was wearing was unacceptable. They said I was naked.
Fozia received a public flogging, punishment similar to that inflicted on this Pakistani woman by the Taliban. Fozia received 30 lashes. She inched her way home despite debilitating injuries.
A female neighbor came to my house to wash my wounds. I was bleeding, my flesh was peeling, and it was extremely painful.
Fozia says it's too risky to own a Bible, so she listens to nightly Christian radio broadcasts from neighboring Kenya. Fozia found refuge at the home of a Christian friend in another Somali city. But what happens to other Somali Christians when their lives are threatened for leaving Islam? Some are receiving help from an American mission group. This safe house not only gives former Muslims a place to eat and sleep, it also provides them with spiritual fellowship and discipleship. It's run by mature believers who host no more than 2 people at a time. Eventually, this safe house will help these temporary residents transition to life on their own. Basma was 7 months pregnant when her Muslim husband divorced her. With nowhere to go, she returned to her mother's house, where she delivered her baby. But when Basma's family discovered she had become a Christian, her stepfather kicked her out of the house.
He said I was infecting the entire household, and he threatened to kill me if I didn't leave.
Basma was forced to live on the street with her infant until a VOM worker met her and offered her refuge at the safe house.
I was praying that God would give me a house where I could sleep. This is a very good house, a house of worship, a house of God. He answered my prayers.
Fozia and other Somali Christians are praying for a better life, one free from the oppression of Al-Shabaab and other Islamists.
Pray that we Somali believers will live our lives closer to the kingdom of God. Pray that we will endure the weight of life in this Islamic nation.
Gary Lane, CBN News, Somalia.
This is the sobering reality for Muslim background believers in Somalia. It is also the experience of countless other Muslim converts throughout the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia and Indonesia. Did you hear the words of our Christian sister at the end of the report? She said, "Pray that we Somali believers will live our lives closer to the kingdom of God. Pray that we will endure the weight of life in this Islamic nation."
He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge, my God and my shield in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the foulest snare, from the deadly pestilence as well. He will cover over you with His feathers, and there under His wings you will find sleep, and His faithfulness will be your shield. Not fear the terror of the nighttime, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. And 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 right there at your right hand. It will not harm you, you will only see, you will only observe when judgment comes. He commands His angels concerning you to guard you wherever you may go, to be with you and lift you in their hands, so that you won't strike your foot against a stone. If you make the Most High your dwelling, even the Lord who is my refuge, surely no great harm will befall you, no disaster will come there near your home. He commands His angels concerning you to guard you wherever you may go, 'Cause he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he knows my name. He will call on me and I will answer. I will be with him always and I will honor him with a long, 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 long life. I will satisfy him with long life, with a long, long, long life. I will satisfy him with long life.
Let me read to you from the Persecuted Church prayer devotional by Beverly J. Pegg. For years, Somalia has been a hotbed of intense anti-Christian violence. According to reports by Christian Solidarity Worldwide, during the 1990s, entire congregations were executed. Wives of church leaders were abducted and forced to marry Muslim men. Pregnant women were forced to have abortions. Somali Christians were dragged from buses and executed on the streets. Non-Somali Christians were also harassed and their humanitarian aid projects attacked with mortar bombs. More recently, on April 23, 2004, thousands of Somalis took to the streets of Mogadishu. They protested against the Christianization of Somalia by setting ablaze gifts and aid parcels sent from Western Europe. These actions were in response to a call to arms issued on the previous day by Sheikh Nur Barad, vice chairman of an influential Islamist group. On April 21st, Barad told the Reuters news agency, "All Somali Christians must be killed according to Islamic law. Such people do not have a place in Somalia, and we will slaughter them." Many of Somalia's Christians belong to the Bantu tribe, an African people who for generations have suffered severe discrimination from other tribes in the Somali region. As a result, many Bantus have migrated abroad. Christian believers and converts from the Somali ethnic group make up another small percentage, and it is this vulnerable Christian minority that is in particular need of international recognition and protection. Persecution against these Christians is so severe that churches have been driven deeply underground. TruthTube TV reveals these tragic statistics. All Christian schools were closed in the 1970s. Christians have been jailed, murdered and tortured. Most remaining Christians have fled to Kenya. Recent reports from Kenya indicate that Somali Christian refugees remain targets of their fellow Somali Muslim refugees. Our Somali brother Mansour Mohammed was able to say in the midst of this unrelenting persecution, "But the church lives in the community of faith." He was later beheaded for the crime of being a Christian. Somalis for Jesus blogspot.com makes the comment, "In 2008, Muslims dug out the only Christian cemetery in the country and dumped the remains in the street. They even persecute our dead."
Nurta is 17 years old, from Somalia. Since converting to Christianity, her parents have severely beaten her for leaving Islam and have shackled her to a tree. She has been confined to her home since May, when her family found out that she had embraced Christianity, said a Christian leader who visited the area. Alarmed by her determination to keep her faith, her parents decided she had gone crazy and forced her to take prescribed medication. But it had no effect in swaying her from her faith, the source said. The tiny, shaken Christian community reports that the girl is shackled to a tree by day and is put in a small, dark room at night. Please stand in prayer with many like Nurta, who share our faith, but not our freedom.
Nurta was shot dead on 25th of November 2010 in an apparent honour killing. Sources suggest the men who shot her did so at her family's request. She remained faithful to the end and entered heaven a hero. I would like to read from Matthew 5, beginning verse 1. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Our persecuted sisters and brothers in Somalia live in the daily reality of our Lord's words. The Beatitudes, as we refer to them, are not simply nice affirmations or suggestions that we can quote or memorize. They are not Christian feel-good sentiments that we can work ourselves up into feeling and expressing on the odd occasion. If we are followers of Jesus Christ, we are promised persecution. It is not an optional extra. It's just that here in the West we have not yet begun to experience the intensity of what our Somali family are living under every day of their lives. Let's listen to a beautiful song called "Christ Be Our Light." The words of the chorus go, "Christ be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ be our light, shine in your church gathered today."
Longing for light, we wait in darkness. Longing for truth, we turn to you. Make us your own, your holy people, light for the world to see. Christ be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ be
Longing for peace, our world is troubled. Longing for hope, many despair. Your word alone has power to save us. Make us your living voice. When my husband Jim and I were living and working in Hong Kong, we had the privilege of getting to know Somali asylum seekers who were volunteering with the organisation we were based with. Throughout 2011, Jim worked with and walked alongside young Somali men who had fled their country and who dreamed of a new life, where they could be safe. Jim not only helped meet all their physical needs, such as clothing, shoes, household items, he also organised English and Mandarin classes for them, encouraging them to learn and grow in new skills that would benefit them when they resettled in new countries. Jim became not only a friend but a father figure to these Somali men. Some of the young boys called him Dad and would even seek him out at home to talk with him, ask his advice, and even have prayer, although they were Muslim. I remember Jim telling me one evening how one of the young men had wept as he shared with him what he had experienced in Somalia. I also had the joy of teaching English to a group of Somali women during this time, and will never forget the afternoon when we all sat on the floor in our lounge room, and I asked them to tell me a little about what their life had been like in Somalia. One of the girls, with better command of English than the others, replied, "We did not go out very much. It was even too dangerous to go to the market." When I asked why, she answered, "Because the men will kill you for your shoes." As I listened, my perspective on shopping experienced a sobering paradigm shift. Here in Australia, I went to the market or the mall for any number of reasons: to buy food, to meet a friend for coffee, to browse various shops, even to buy a pair of shoes. And I have never given a fleeting thought to how blessed and privileged I am to be able to do that week in, week out, and never have to fear that I will be beaten or killed for the sandals on my feet. I would like to finish now with a profoundly challenging comment by Nick Ripken, author of The Insanity of God, a book I would strongly recommend every listener reads and passes on.
It was a very, very difficult time because believers in Somalia, 1991, there were about 150 of them, and by 1997, only 4 were left alive. That's crucifixion almost without resurrection. And that's why we left Somalia so broken as we watched a whole generation of believers wiped out. How can you stand crucifixion without resurrection? And I vowed unto God that part of the brokenness of Somalia would not be wasted, those deaths, that blood would not be wasted, and we would find ways to prepare ourselves and others to go to the Somalis of the world without making the mistakes that caused the deaths of believers prematurely.
We needed to go to places of persecution, go to where believers not have survived, but have thrived in persecution. He said, if while I'm in prison, I hear that my wife and children are hung to death, rather than deny Jesus, I will be the most proud man in prison.
And what believers in persecution say, we are so thankful that we have the honor to suffer with Jesus. What would you call that? Would you call that sanity? Would you call that the American dream? I would call that the insanity of God.
And when the Bible becomes present, active tense, not only is God out of the box, there's no box. It's burnt, it's ashes.
This is Helen Motti for Eternity.
For eternity. For eternity. For eternity.
For Eternity is produced in the studios of Rima FM, Port Macquarie.